Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 31st episode of Don't Forget the Popcorn. I've seen a few people do this before, and I wanted to do my own. So today, we're going to be going over my favorite movies for each year I've been alive. I thought this would be a good one for today because it is my 31st episode, and I am 31 years old currently. I was born in 1991, so I will start there and go all the way until 2022 because 23 isn't over yet. One movie per year. I'm not getting any younger, so I wanted to do this before the list would be too long. I will be doing my 100 favorite movies of all time, maybe for my 100th episode, but for now, to give any new viewers a taste of what I like, this should do for now. So let's get into my favorite movie for each year I've been alive. 1991, The Double Life of Veronique, directed by Krzysztof Kieslowski. Now, I didn't pick the Terminator 2 because I was born in October and it came out in July. I just felt it wasn't right because I technically wasn't alive. The Double Life is a movie with two parallel stories about an identical girl, one in Poland, one in France. Their lives cross in a weird way and the story unfolds. This movie might not be for everyone, but it's a good watch with some cool shots and colors in the film and an interesting, unpredictable story from one of the best directors. 1992, Reservoir Dogs, directed by Quentin Tarantino. This is one of the best directorial debuts of all time, a fun, quick watch. This movie follows a group of men who are involved in a heist that goes south, and they have to figure out who can be trusted and who can't be. It's the best heist movie where you don't see the heist. It's carried by great acting, direction, and a dope soundtrack. 1993, A Bronx Tale, directed by Robert De Niro. This year was hard as frick. So many good ones. Not picking Tombstone almost felt criminal, but I went with this movie and De Niro's directorial debut. It follows a young Italian boy growing up in the Bronx who is raised with two father figures, one straight-laced and one in the criminal underworld. We watch him grow up and navigate through life with the lessons that both fathers provide. A lot of people haven't seen this one, but I highly recommend it. 1994, The Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont. Well, this year was even harder than 93. My lord, the bangers. Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, Lion King, The Crow, Natural Born Killers, Clerks, Interview with a Vampire, Leon the Professional, Three Colors Red. Like, how could I even pick? Well, I went with the most cliche and universally loved movies of all time. This movie follows Andy Dufresne, who has to navigate his way through the Shawshank prison. This movie is brutal, but will have you feeling so joyous by the end. We get two all-time performances from Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. 1995, Toy Story, directed by John Lasseter. This year was hard, but not like 93 and 4. Toy Story, do I need to tell you what this is about? This is one of the first movies I actually remember seeing in theaters, and I think it's because I was so fascinated with what I was seeing. After being accustomed to two-dimensional cartoons and animation, seeing this 3D insane world that Pixar made captivated me and still does to this day. I grew up with Andy, so this one has a special place in my heart. 96, From Dusk Till Dawn, directed by Robert Rodriguez. I know this is a weird pick, and there are absolutely better movies that came out that year. But this movie is just so much fun. A fun crime story that turns into a vampire nightmare. Although I'll agree, the second half doesn't hold the weight of the first, it's still one of my favorite horror movies, and it's so rewatchable. This movie is where we first saw Clooney on the big screen, and he is epic in this. 1997, Boogie Nights, directed by PTA. Well, this one was easy because it's my favorite movie of all time, along with The Empire Strikes Back. PTA followed up Hard 8 with one of the most interesting stories about the boom in the adult industry and the shift from the 70s to the 80s. Honing in on his inner Robert Altman and Marty Scorsese, he makes this ensemble cast work so well, getting beast mode performances from Mark Wahlberg, Julianne Moore, Don Cheadle, Burt Reynolds, and John C. Reilly. I can watch this movie anytime, anywhere. 1998, American History X, directed by Tony Kaye. One of the most powerful movies with one of the most powerful performances from Ed Norton. American History X follows a neo Nazi who was trying to cope with his father's death and the changing neighborhoods around him. This is an important film and even is still very relevant to today. I used to watch this with my boys all the time in middle school. 1999 Election, directed by Alexander Payne. This was obviously the hardest year. Some banging foreign releases with Beau Travail and Rosetta, some good animated movies with South Park and the Iron Giant, some hard comedies with American Pie and Office Space, and of course you had Eyes Wide Shut, The Matrix, and Fight Club. But I'm gonna roll with the lesser known offbeat Election based on the book of the same name. This is Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon at their finest in this movie about a girl who is obsessed with winning the school election and a teacher who doesn't want to see that happen. This movie is funny, raunchy, and extremely unique. 2000 American Psycho, directed by Mary Horan. So many hard ones to leave off. I lived in the movies with my mom back in 2000, but one I absolutely adore is this film about consumerism, yuppie culture, music, fitting in, and it's all tied up in the mind of a psychopath. Christian Bale is one of my favorite working actors now, and I think he marked his place in film history with this one. The business card scene still kills me every time. 2001 Y Tu Mama Tambien, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Another year I lived in the movies. I saw all the fun comedies and action films, but to be honest, the amount of films that I think have really stood the test of time this year isn't many. So I went with the Mexican classic from the legendary Alfonso. This film is about a road trip with a trio, two teenage boys and an older lady, and all three of them find out a lot about themselves and each other. It's funny, emotional, heartfelt, and very real. This film blew me away, and I saw it later in life, but this is easily top 3 of '01. The best films of this year were all foreign language films. 2002 City of God, directed by Fernando Mireles and Keisha Lunn. A fun year for film, but I had to go with the Brazilian classic. This movie is a ruthless, crime-filled coming-of-age story with one of the scariest gangsters of all time in Lil Dice. A fun movie with a great story and great characters. This is one that you watch with the homies. It carries heavy themes of trust, morals, karma, and having ambition. 2003 Kill Bill Volume 1. And a year where the releases were underwhelming outside of Old Boy, Old School, School of Rock, Return of the King, and Finding Nemo, this was a pretty easy pick for me. Kill Bill was fun. I remember my buddy's brother showing us this movie when it came out, and I was blown away. Super fun, super stylistic, and it had one of the dopest scores ever. I watched this movie every year or so to fall right back in the mood I was when I first saw it. Easily one of my most rewatched films. 2004 Mean Girls, directed by Mark Waters. It was hard not picking Before Sunset, but in a year much better than '03 with some heavy hitting dramas, comedies, and fantasy movies, I went with the coming of age comedy classic Mean Girls. I saw this in theaters on a triple date with the homies, and we were laughing harder than the girls who dragged us to see it. I loved it off the rip, and of course watched it as soon as it dropped on DVD with my mom. We can all quote this movie all day long. Lindsay Lohan and Rachel McAdams go head to head in this high school comedy masterpiece. This was maybe the last really great high school movie ever made. 2005 Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, directed by George Lucas. Pretty much was a hero year outside of Brokeback. Batman Begins and Sin City were great, but I had to go with my favorite origin story ever. This movie shows us how Anakin really turns to the dark side, becoming the man we all love. One of my favorite created characters, Darth Vader. Although this movie has its issues, it is super fun, emotional, and highly rewatchable with some big risks taken by George here. It also serves as the last Star Wars movie he was a part of and was an end of an era. 2006 The Departed, directed by Martin Scorsese. Paprika, The Prestige, and Children of Men were hard to leave off, but how do you not pick The Departed? One of the best remakes of all time with one of the best cat and mouse stories. This movie is bone chilling, with Jack Nicholson playing one of my favorite villains ever. Leo DeCap, Marky Mark, Jack Nix, and Matt Damon serve it up big with one of the funniest and most underrated performances from Alec Baldwin. I would highly recommend this to anyone. 2007, There Will Be Blood, directed by PTA. '07 was a year filled with a lot of movies I consider some of my favorites and actually most personal watches, like Juno, Ratatouille, and Superbad. But this was an easy pick. Arguably one of the best movies ever made, There Will Be Blood is a movie that made me look at films very differently. It made me appreciate the pure art of filmmaking and what hard work and dedication can really do in the right hands. Daniel Day-Lewis offers one of the best performances of all time with Daniel Plainview, and Paul Thomas Anderson proves again why he is one of the best filmmakers of all time. 2008, Ponyo, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. '08 was a little bit meh, but we got another classic from Miyazaki. This is one of the most gorgeously animated films I've ever seen, and this movie is just a fun, magical ride about two different kids who become best friends, a tale of parenthood and the lengths we go to protect our children. But the most fun is watching this beautiful thing play out on screen. 2009, The Hangover, directed by Todd Phillips. Look, I have a humorous side. I'm not very funny, but I appreciate funny things. This movie is one of the funniest movies ever made, and I'd honestly go as far as to say it's one of the best movies ever made. Hear me out. This is one of the last major comedies to make waves like it did, and it's over 10 years old. It made a ton of money, it's a pop culture icon, and sparked three of the best careers in the industry right now, and transforming Bradley Cooper from an up-and-comer to a megastar. I saw this in theaters and I went with my crew plus the extended crew, and I feel like my whole freaking class was there. Movie was packed and everybody had a good time. 2010, Toy Story 3, directed by Lee Unkrich. 2010 was a great year. I was graduating high school, getting ready to start college, and finding myself in new ways, just like Andy was. Like I mentioned earlier, when talking about Toy Story 1, Andy and I were the same age. So I felt like I grew up with this kid, watching these movies so much throughout my life. I snuck into this movie with my girl, my homie, and his girl. I know, I'm terrible. It still made over $1 billion. And by the end, me and my homie were in tears and our girls were looking at us like we were freaking crazy. Well, because that movie hit harder than Mike Tyson, and I don't care what anyone says, it's one of the best movies ever made. 2011, A Seperation, directed by Asghar Farhadi. Really was only between this and We Need to Talk About Kevin for me. A Separation is a film I saw recently and was rather blown away. This is a perfect example of good writing and good actors is all you need to make a good movie. Kind of like the Danish film The Hunt that came out the next year, it follows a good man whose name is tarnished over lies and rumors. This is a heavy film with lots of deep humanistic themes. The film challenges its watchers to think and question your own morals about what is right and wrong. 2012, Django Unchained, directed by Quentin Tarantino. A lot of Tarantino on this list, and 2012 was a great year for film. Leaving my guy PTA and The Master off this list felt so bad. But Django was one of my favorite movies ever. So funny, yet so sick and twisted. Django is one of the best and most rewatchable slave movies ever made. We get the chilling performances from Leo, dope performances from Christoph, Jamie, and Sam, with some Quint's best writing and action. I have seen this movie so many times, it's not even funny. 2013, The Wolf of Wall Street, directed by Martin Scorsese. A lot of Leo on the list, and back to back. If you've seen this movie, then you can easily tell me why I have it as my pick. This movie is freaking nuts, a unique and different film for almost everyone involved, and Marty put the hammer down on this one. This 3 hour epic is one of the most unique films of the 2010s and is on its way to being considered a GOAT. I do think that Matthew McConaughey should have won Best Actor, but Wolf of Wall Street was a better movie than Dallas Buyers Club. 2014, What We Do in the Shadows, directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi. I know some of you are probably shocked by this pick considering some of the movies that came out this year. But if Only Lovers Left Alive was just 1 year later, that would have been in this place. Looks like we're having a resurgence of vampire movies in the late 2000s and early 2010s with Thirst, Only Lovers Left Alive, and Let the Right One In. Then you have this quirky, funny take on vampires living in a modern day situation, a mockumentary type of film that will have you dying of laughter. This group of vampires get into the silliest real life situations, and it's so fun to see. I do love vampires, so I am a little biased here. 2015, Dope, directed by Rick Famuyiwa. 2015 was quite weak for films that year. One little movie no one really knew about at its release was Dope. Finally started to get a reputation since getting put on Netflix. I've been preaching this movie since its release. This movie is a fun coming of age story about a bunch of outcasts in their neighborhood who have to sell drugs on the internet in order to achieve a goal and stay out of trouble. This movie is funny yet quite serious as these high school dorks navigate through the modern criminal underworld. 2016, The Handmaiden, directed by Park Chan-wook. This was a great year for movies and a good year for Asian films. We had anime juggernauts Your Name and A Silent Voice the movie come out, which either of them could have easily took this spot. But I gave it to the legendary Park Chan-wook with this masterpiece. The Handmaiden is one of the most stylized, unique, original, and alluring films I've ever watched. This story is full of twists and turns that just keeps this vehicle speeding through the 2.5 hour runtime. Easily one of the best movies of the century. 2017, Phantom Thread, directed by PTA. I know Blade Runner 2049 was the obvious pick, and I went back and forth between the two. And even though I watched Blade Runner 2049 more, I can't deny the visceral feeling this movie gives me. I watched this movie, and I'm sort of on autopilot when it's on. I love what the great Daniel Day did with this role, and a star-making performance in Vicky Creeps. The world PTA creates here is just beautiful as we follow the life of a dressmaker and his muse. Only the great PTA can make a movie like this, and it's this good. That's why he's on this list so much. 2018, Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster. Capernaum and so many good hero films this year almost picked one, but sorry man, this one is one of my favorites of all time. Hereditary scared me in the most unusual way. It unsettled me and made me feel like I was a part of this family and I was going to suffer the same fate as them. This movie didn't reinvent the wheel with the supernatural cult trope, but it changed the game in its execution. Hereditary has one of the most unusual and mortifying deaths I've ever seen in a film, and I love every minute of it. Toni Collette was robbed of an Oscar nomination. 2019, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by Quentin Tarantino. Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Parasite were two major foreign releases that year, and both are considered some of the greatest of all time already. Super great movies and super important, but that can be decided later. Once Upon a Time is easily one of the best movies ever made, and I don't care what anyone has to say about it. They've been hating on this movie, but some of you guys are starting to come around. This movie is slick, funny, wacky, and an outrageous take on a particular crime of the 60s in Hollywood. This is Tarantino's most vulnerable film, and I think this movie is a reflection of himself and the two leads with the highs and lows of life and getting older. Leonardo and Brad Pitt had amazing chemistry, and this movie is a fun ride from start to finish. 2020, Another Round, directed by Thomas Vinterberg. 2020 had some terrible releases all across the board. The next best movie would be Soul. Another Round is a Danish film about a group of teachers who use alcohol as an experiment to see how it affects their personalities and daily life. This movie is funny and straightforward, all while being one of the most emotionally gripping and mentally complex movies, as you can analyze loved ones or even yourself when watching the behaviors of these people change with the abuse of the substance. Mads Mikkelsen is truly one of the most underrated actors of his generation. 2021, Nobody, directed by Ila Nayshuler. 21 was much better than 20, but still a little bit whack. We got Dune, which is legendary, but we did get one of the best action movies of all time with Nobody. Super fun with some sick style. It's a poor man's John Wick, but somehow Bob Odenkirk has more charisma than Keanu. Nothing new is being done here, and the wheel isn't being reinvented, but the execution, editing, and choreography in this movie is A1, and it holds up against any action classic. We also see Christopher Lloyd and RZA blowing dudes apart. 2022, RRR, directed by S.S. Rajamouli. The movies are back, and this past year proved it. 2022 had some of the best American and international releases we've had in years. Top Gun, Everything Everywhere, Banshees of Inisherin, The Batman, The Whale, Puss in Boots, The Decision to Leave, The Triangle of Sadness, Tar, Sonic 2, Elvis, The Menu, A Man Called Otto, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, Bullet Train, Nope, The Glass Onion, Marcel the Shell, Guillermo's Pinocchio, The Worst Person in the World, hell, even Babylon. I name all these movies just to quickly remind everyone that this was a great comeback year for the thing we all love, the movies. My pick for this incredible year is RRR. This is one of the most fun movies I've ever seen, a unique, over the top, wild, wacky, yet deep, heartfelt, and triumphant. The film will leave you wanting more even after 3 hours of runtime. This Indian blockbuster is already a classic, and Disney needs to really watch this movie to get some inspiration for their future. This movie is one of the most important releases in years and will be one of the pioneering films in expanding world cinema and making it more readily available and accessible in theaters. With Parasite and RRR making big money at box office, reaching audiences outside of their market, and winning major awards at American ceremonies, world cinema is making its way, and I'm so excited for it. Guys, thank you so much for checking out my favorite films of each year I've been alive. I'm really happy if you made it to the end here. Let me know your favorite movies for each year you were born down in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next week. And don't forget the popcorn.